So then talk about, you get the call, you have the tryout. Obviously you nail it. Talk about now your infancy at WWE, working in the performance center before making it to NXT and, level up and those type of shows. Just who were you working under and training with in those early stages?
In the early
I believe
stages,
Matt Bloom is a big like trainer there, right? The former A Train.
he's the head coach,
Okay.
and he just kind of oversees everybody and everything. And obviously, he gives his uh, opinions and his outlook and input. But when you first get there, who you train with primarily, um, typically, and I'm assuming it's still that way because he's great at what he does, is Robbie Brookside. You start out with him. I think sometimes they switch it up where the guys will go with Robbie and the girls will go with Norman Smiley. I've had the privilege of being in both classes. But you start out primarily in Robbie Brookside's classes, and then you kind of get the feel, the hang of the ropes, and you just kind of work there for however long they feel is necessary for you. And then I don't remember how long it took until I ended up being in Norman Smiley's class, but I um, I believe before my first match on TV, I was in his class. I'm not entirely positive on the timeline, but I believe that was the case. And then you move around. So um, shortly after that, I was in AJ Winkler's class, and then I was in Terry Taylor's class, and then I was, eventually Steve Carino's class. Eventually, Fit Finley. You move around after a while, but when you first get there, it's come to Robbie Brookside's class. You get there early, stay late. I would always go to Extra Ring, and all that. So a lot of sweat equity is to be earned in your first however long when you're there.
Okay. What would you say is the best or the most important thing that you learned from each of those individual coaches? Like, what did Robbie Brookside take away from him that you still imply to your career? And what'd you take away from Norman Smiley and Terry Taylor? Like, what were the biggest things they taught you that you try to implement still today?
It's funny because each of those coaches have they all have an impact on me. Um, and they all have one in different ways, some more wrestling related, some more life related, some more wrestling and life related, for example, one of the first things that Terry Taylor ever told me, when I went through a particular situation when I was there, um, everything in life is a test. And if you view it that way, then you'll pass the test every time. So I always think, everything's a test. As exhausting as that sounds, everything's a test. To go on to, if you're asking individually, like Robbie, for example, basic done well has always been, you watch the indies, you watch whatever programs, and you see people do all these crazy moves, stuff like that. And everybody's guilty of it. I am myself, but at the end of the day, the best matches that people rattle off or name off, the most memorable have less to do with the moves and more to do with the moments. Obviously, the moves are important, but especially in your early career, it's hey. But look at a guy like Roman, he's not doing poison ranas or Canadian destroyers or anything like that. But he's probably the most recognizable name in pro wrestling right now. And that's not true of everybody either. Seth Rollins is also a big influence of mine, and you know, uh, he does whatever he wants, and he's also just as recognizable. So it's I've also learned from Steve Carino. You got to carve your own path. Sometimes, some people say the moves don't matter. Some people say the moves do, and you have to figure out what path you want to take for your career. You got to walk to the beat of your own drum. Norman taught me all these crazy holds and transitions. He's just a mastermind. Fit Finley taught me aggression. How to be real. AJ is another person that taught me a mix of both aggression and all these holes and all these transitions. I could list off so many names. I'm just rattling them off as I think of them. You know, but Bloom himself, he showed me the value of sweat equity and just keep moving forward and being available and all that. So it's a matter of all these coaches, and there are more that if you ask me specifically, I'll have an answer for you, but they all have left a lasting impact on me, and at the end of the day, they're coaches there for a reason. It's all of these people are the best at what they do when it comes to training and coaching, and it's all flavors of ice cream at the end of the day. And it's like a ice creamery or whatever you call it, in there. You get to pick so many brains, you get to talk to so many people and ask them about their experiences. Terry Taylor has a different experience working from WWF versus Steve Carino, who's worked ECW. But like neither of those experiences trump one or the other. Both of them just have such crazy differences that you learn so much. You're like, okay, well, maybe I'll take something from here and something from there, and carve my own path. So there's a lot to be learned in that warehouse for sure.
What talk about what's a really bad or negative experience you had that you took and turned it into a positive and actually learned from it? Like what's your own personal lesson that you learned from a negativity?
I mean, when I got there, my hair was longer than it is now. And the stories been passed around on all the dirt sheets and all that. So it's a lot long in the history, but long story short, I was told or highly suggested to cut my hair, and I said yes because it was my first match, and it was 2 months in, or first TV match, and it was 2 months in, and I didn't have no sort of skin in the game, no equity, nothing. So I was like, well, this is the time to show the office, to show the boys that I'm really about this life. Here it is. And this, that's where I go back and think, everything's a test, and if you view it that way, then I'll always pass.
Do you feel like they told you that because they feel like you look too generic, like too many of the other wrestlers, like Shawn Michaels, etc., had long hair and everything? They were like, we don't want you to start getting compared to all these people. Like, if you view it from their side, I'm not trying to defend them or anything, or was it just a test, like you think?
Well, it was one specific person for one.
Hmm.
So I think he just had a preference.
Oh, okay.
Because at the time in NXT, there was maybe one other guy that had long hair.
Hmm.
So like, I highly doubt that I would have gotten any comparison either at that time with just how I looked. I don't think so. I think it was just a particular preference, which I'm not even, I'm not saying that it's wrong to have that preference, but I that's what I tend to believe.
I love that you brought up Norman Smiley as one of your trainers because he's one of those guys that I feel doesn't get the flowers he deserves. So many people look at him and they just think about, like he was demonstrating, the big wiggle and everything. They completely neglect what a technical wrestler he is and how good he is. Take this moment and just kind of put him over a little bit more as far as, not just the character work that I'm sure he taught you, because that big wiggle did get him over big time, but try to help put over some of his technical abilities a little bit more because he's one I feel gets slept on. And you having that personal experience and relationship learning under him, just give him a little bit of that shine.
Absolutely. I do think he is someone that is underrated when it comes to speaking about people who have an impact on the business. If you watch his stuff, his shoot wrestling stuff in Japan, it's a completely different animal than, his WCW wiggle stuff. Right. But, and I think that's some, I'm glad that you mentioned Norman by name because he in a lot of ways, and I'm not no technical wizard like Norman Smiley is. I like to think I'm decent at what I do, but I'm nowhere in that echelon, at least not yet. But he was someone that had all this technical prowess, all this knowledge, but found his mold as doing the wiggle on in WCW, and I think that was something that kind of helped me realize, certain spots are meant for certain things, and you have to play with the cards that you have, play with the cards that you dealt. When it was time for him to go, he went, and he was phenomenal. And then when it was time for him to wiggle, man, he busted out. He busted it out, and that was, and the people loved it. So, I think it helps me view myself in a different lens as a wrestler, because, the matches that I'm having now, I think, are barn burners all the time. But I like to think about my character work, and, obviously the core kid stuff, that's super fun. It's a different, more serious tone to it. But when I look at Big Body Javi, I'm like, man, I'm a versatile guy. I can work, 97 Jericho, I can work, 2000, 90, late early 90s Sean, I can work that style and have fun, and people get over, like get over as a character like that. But then with the character that I'm doing now, or with the thing that I'm doing now that is more myself and more genuine, Norman, when I look to Norman as that kind of model when it comes to, having the duality of both.
It goes to show you never know what gets over